I caught my new tenant elbow deep in my private reserve barrel at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and it was not the strangest part of that year, but it is the part one still tell people first. "That barrel isn't ready," I said from the doorway. She did not jump. She did not apologize. She turned around with cider on her wrist and said, "It's ready enough to tell me you're doing something wrong with the tannin." I want to say I threw her out. I did not. I got 2 glasses. My name is Owen Castellano. I grow apples and press them into something worth waiting for. Margot Sinclair taught me that a person can walk into your life uninvited and still turn out to be exactly the thing you needed to let in. At the time, she had lived in the stone cottage at the edge of my orchard for 11 days. We had spoken 4 times. Once about the hot water pressure, once about where she could park, and twice because Aunt Rosalie had introduced us again after forgetting she had already done it. Margot was 29, enrolled in a year-long cider-making apprenticeship through the regional guild, and apparently unfamiliar with the ordinary meaning of a locked door. "It wasn't locked," she pointed out when I mentioned this. "It was closed. Rosalie said the spare key opened the press house if I ever needed the equipment. During working hours. She didn't include that clause. It was implied by darkness." Margot lifted the thief from the barrel and held it over her glass. A dark gold thread of cider slipped from the narrow tube. The press house smelled of old timber, yeast, and the sweet edge of apples becoming something less innocent. "You came in here to steal my reserve? Benchmark. That is a sophisticated word for theft. I'm making a bittersweet trial blend tomorrow. I wanted to compare the finish. So you chose the 1 barrel clearly marked private reserve. Do not sample." Her eyes moved to the chalk lettering behind her. "Your signage is excellent. I should have been angrier. I had spent 10 months building that cider from Dabinet, Kingston Black, and a small amount of Wixon. The barrel was meant for Castellano Cider's autumn release, and I did not let visitors near it without me." Margot tasted again, frowned, and waited. That patience irritated me more than an argument would have. I took 2 clean glasses from the shelf, drew a proper sample, and handed one to her. "Tell me exactly what you think is wrong." She warmed the glass between her palms, smelled it, then took a smaller taste than before. "The fruit is good. The acid is clean. But the new oak is drying out the finish before the apple can come back. It has 6 months left. Then it may integrate." "May? Do you want reassurance or an answer?" Nobody had spoken to me like that in my own press house since my father died. "An answer. Pull a gallon tomorrow. Rest half in glass, blend the other half with something rounder, and taste them blind in a week. If the glass wins, your barrel is taking more than it gives." She was not guessing. Her language was precise, and she did not watch my face to adjust the conclusion. I tasted the reserve again. The tannin closed over the finish exactly where she had said it did. "You're still trespassing. I can be wrong legally and right chemically." I drank the rest of my sample. "Out." She rinsed the thief, wiped the bench, and left the room cleaner than she had found it. At the door, she looked back. "For what it's worth, the cider before the finish is beautiful." That sounds like reassurance. It was an answer. I stood alone after she crossed the yard, watching the cottage light come on through the apple trees. Then I pulled a gallon from the reserve. The next evening, a note appeared beneath the windscreen wiper of my truck. "Press House, 7. Permission included." Below that, in smaller writing, "I have my trial blend. You may insult it in revenge." At 7:05, I entered the press house and found Margot waiting beside 3 labeled bottles, 2 glasses, and a plate of bread she had cut with excessive seriousness. "You're late. It is 7:05. That is a number after 7. I own the building." A dangerous management philosophy. She had tied her dark hair at the base of her neck. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and there was a faint purple mark on one wrist from hauling crates during her guild placement that afternoon. She poured 3 samples without explaining them. "Blind. I want an answer, not reassurance." I almost smiled. Her first cider was bright but thin. The second had better fruit and a medicinal finish. The third carried baked apple, green spice, and just enough bitterness to make me want another taste. The third. Why? It finishes where the other two give up. Anything wrong with it? The acid will feel sharper when it's cold. And you've used too much Yarlington Mill. 3% too much? 5. She showed me the blend sheet. It was 4. Annoying, she decided. You invited me. I'm beginning to question that. We adjusted the blend twice. When we finally agreed, Margot leaned both hands against the bench and looked at the bottles as if they had confessed something useful. Why cider? I asked. That is a large question for a Tuesday. It's Wednesday. Then I've lost more than I thought. She tore a piece of bread and considered how much truth to offer. My family works in hospitality. Wine lists, restaurants, hotels. I grew up around people who could identify a vineyard by smelling a cork. Cider was the first thing I loved that nobody had already selected for me. They don't approve? They funded the apprenticeship. It answered nothing and said enough. She nodded toward the dark window. Why have you never left Hollis Ridge? I have. For longer than a trade show? 6 months at Cornell. For months in France. 3 weeks in Washington before my father called to say the press had broken and apparently I was the only man east of Seattle who understood hydraulic pressure. And you came back. Every time. Because you had to? I looked through the glass at the slope my grandfather had planted. Trees visible only as black rows beneath the first stars. At first, Margot did not ask what changed. I did not ask why a woman with expensive training and a Boston address had chosen the cheapest cottage in Hollis Ridge. We drank the final blend in silence. When she left, 2 hours had passed. Neither of us called it a date. Spring made privacy difficult. The orchard required everyone at once. Gid Okafor and I spent the early weeks pruning winter damage and checking irrigation. Margot needed orchard hours for her apprenticeship, so the guild assigned part of her fieldwork to Castellano. That decision had been made before she rented the cottage, but after the barrel I briefly suspected Aunt Rosalie of arranging the entire regional economy for entertainment. You flatter my reach, she told me over Sunday lunch. Rosalie was 64, owned the cottage, and had never met a boundary she could not improve by stepping over it. You gave her the press house key. I gave my tenant access to the property she works on. At midnight, young people keep strange hours. She is 29. I am 36. Rosalie buttered her bread. Exactly. Almost no time left. Gid laughed hard enough to inhale coffee. He had known me since we were 9 and had co-owned the cider-making operation for 8 years. He handled wholesale accounts, fermentation schedules, and the parts of friendship that required insulting me accurately. I like the tenant, he announced. You've spoken to her once. She told you the reserve was over-oaked in under 10 minutes. I respect efficiency. The glass-rested sample won our blind tasting a week later. Margot did not celebrate. She only tapped the losing glass and asked, Did it take? The experiment? The correction? Yes. Good. That same afternoon, I took her to the grafting rows. My grandfather had planted the original orchard with Macintosh and Northern Spy. Some of those trees still stood. Every year we grafted small pieces of rarer cider varieties onto proven rootstock, joining new wood to old roots and waiting to see whether the living tissues accepted each other. I cut through the wrapping on one graft and showed her the swelling beneath it. The callus means the two pieces are joining. If the bud starts growing, it took. And if it didn't, we cut away the dead scion and try again next season. Can you tell early? Sometimes, but checking too often can disturb it. She held the loose end of the grafting tape while I rewrapped the union. So what do you do? Protect it. Give it time. Wait for an honest answer. That sounds intolerable. Most worthwhile processes are rude about schedules. She passed me the pruning shears. Our fingers brushed. Neither of us reacted. It was a small contact between people working with cold hands. I remembered it that evening anyway. The weeks gathered through ordinary labor. Margot learned to thin blossom clusters without apologizing to every future apple. I learned that she could carry 2 full picking bags but became irrationally angry when a hose kinked. She thought my labeling system was excessive until it prevented Gid from adding a yeast culture to the wrong tank. I thought her tasting vocabulary was occasionally theatrical until she identified a fermentation fault from across the room. She never romanticized the orchard. She complained about mud, black flies, invoices, and the way agricultural suppliers treated delivery windows as mythology. She asked what our equipment loan cost. She noticed when a wholesale account paid late. She understood that 42 acres could be beautiful and still fail to cover payroll after one bad freeze. That mattered to me more than I wanted it to. Elise had loved photographs of the orchard. She had loved autumn weekends, string lights in the tasting barn, and telling friends that her fiancé made cider. She had not loved February pruning or the fact that a tree did not care about dinner reservations. 7 years after she left for Boston, I had stopped missing her. I had not stopped arranging my life around the lesson. Margot and I worked well together because she did not need me to become easier. When I rejected a blend, she asked why. When she disagreed, she did not soften the answer until I could mistake it for agreement. I began asking for her palette during blending sessions that did not count toward her apprenticeship. She began appearing with dinner from the diner because both Gid and I forgot food whenever the numbers became interesting. "This is not kindness," she warned the first time. "I refuse to learn from men whose blood sugar is affecting the product. We appreciate your commitment to quality control. Eat the sandwich, Owen." By June, I knew the sound of her boots in the press house. I could identify her shampoo beneath the smell of fermenting fruit. I knew she drank coffee with milk but no sugar, unless she was exhausted, when she added honey and denied it. She knew I checked the weather twice before bed and that I rubbed the scar across my left palm when worried about money. None of that was romance. Not yet. It was simply the slow accumulation of being noticed. The wasp sting happened in late July. I was replacing a broken support near the top of a ladder when I disturbed a paper nest beneath the crossbeam. One wasp caught me below the ear. I climbed down, swore, took an antihistamine, and finished tying the support because stubbornness often resembles professionalism from a distance. By evening, the left side of my neck had swollen. I was dizzy, breathing normally but not comfortably, and unwilling to create a medical emergency out of something I had survived before. Gid had gone to Burlington for a delivery. Rosalie was visiting her sister. I turned off my phone and lay down with an ice pack. At 8, someone knocked. At 8:02, the spare key turned. Margot entered my kitchen holding her phone, saw my neck, and stopped. "Absolutely not. Good evening to you too. Why didn't you answer?" "I was resting. You missed the guild check-in. Gid called me, and your truck is outside." She crossed the room and put the back of her fingers against my forehead. "Are you having trouble breathing?" "No. That answer took too long. I'm breathing. We're going to urgent care. Margot, you can walk to my car or I can call an ambulance and explain that the respected orchard owner was defeated by an insect and his own personality. The urgent care clinic closes at 9. Then move." The doctor called it a significant local reaction, gave me medication, prescribed an epinephrine injector because future reactions could be worse, and told me the sentence Margot had been waiting to hear. "You should not have stayed alone." On the drive home, she kept both hands tight around the wheel. "You can say it," I offered. "I have several options. Choose the shortest." "Idiot." "Efficient." Back at the house, the medication made me heavy and slow. Margot filled a glass of water, set the injector on the table where I could reach it, and crouched in front of my chair. "I need to see the swelling." I turned my head. Her fingers rested carefully beneath my jaw. The touch was clinical. Her thumb was warm against my skin. My body noticed before I gave it permission. Margot noticed too. Her hand became very still. Then she measured the swelling against the mark the doctor had drawn and moved away. "Better," she decided. "You were right. About urgent care?" "The barrel." She stared at me. "You are drugged." It seemed safer to admit it now. Her laugh released some of the fear she had carried from the cottage. She remained until after midnight. She refilled my water, checked my breathing without pretending she was not checking, and ignored every attempt I made to send her home. I had spent years being useful enough that nobody needed to care for me. That night, I let her. The next afternoon, I found my boots aligned beside the back door and a note on the kitchen table. Take the medication with food. This is medical advice and also an assessment of your character. Below it, she had added, the key worked because you told Rosalie I could use it in an emergency. This was one. For the first time, the spare key did not feel like an intrusion. After that, our evenings changed. Margot began stopping at my porch after work. At first she stayed for one glass of cider and a complaint about her coursework. Then the glasses became tea because we both needed sleep, and sometimes we sat without drinking anything at all. The orchard after dark had a particular quiet. Leaves moved before the wind reached the porch. Insects worked invisibly in the grass. The press house cooling system hummed across the yard. Margot did not fill silence because she feared it. I did not mistake silence for departure when she was there. Her boots started appearing beside my door. She would arrive in socks, having crossed the yard after leaving the mud at home, then forget the boots when she returned to the cottage. I carried them back the first 2 times. On the third, I left them where they were. You're encouraging bad behavior, she observed the next morning. I've accepted that doors cannot stop you. Growth. The storm came in late August. Wind climbed the ridge before sunset, bending the upper branches and sending green apples into the grass. We secured equipment, closed the tasting barn, and checked the young trees until rain drove us inside. Power failed just after 9. Margot's cottage had a fireplace. My house had the backup battery for the weather station and a sofa large enough for 2 people who were pretending not to think about its size. She arrived carrying a battery lantern, her laptop, and an orchard restoration documentary downloaded for her apprenticeship. This is educational, she announced. This is a 70-minute film about rootstock. Try to control yourself. We sat at opposite ends of the sofa while rain struck the windows. 20 minutes into the film, Margot pulled her feet beneath her. 40 minutes in, her shoulder rested against mine. I did not move. Near the end, her breathing changed. Her head settled against my shoulder, and the laptop light moved softly across her sleeping face. I could have woken her. Instead, I lowered the volume and placed my arm along the back of the sofa so she would not slide. Sometime later, she turned toward me in her sleep. My arm came around her without decision. We stayed that way until the power returned at 1:12. Every lamp in the room switched on at once. Margot woke beneath my chin. I looked down. She looked up. For one suspended second, neither of us seemed to remember how we had arrived there. Then the documentary narrator said, at unnecessary volume, successful unions require close contact between living tissue. Margot covered her face. I laughed first. She joined me, helpless and half asleep, while the refrigerator restarted and the weather station began protesting lost data. She stood, smoothed her hair, and picked up the lantern. Good night, Owen. Good night. At the door, she looked back once. No kiss followed. The absence of one stayed with me for days. The grape arbor beside Margot's cottage collapsed the following week. She claimed it had been leaning artistically. I described the angle as structural surrender. On Saturday morning, I arrived with cedar posts, braces, and enough lumber to remove the debate. Margot stood in the doorway holding coffee. Did I ask you to fix that? Did I ask you to drive me to urgent care? You were swelling. The arbor is also swelling. That doesn't make sense. I've already unloaded the saw. She changed into work clothes and helped. We spent 6 hours replacing the rotted posts and rebuilding the top frame. Margot measured twice and still cut one brace short. I installed a joint backward and blamed the sun. We argued about whether vines could hold grudges. Late in the afternoon, she steadied the final crosspiece while I drove the screws. I tested the joint with both hands. Did it take? She asked. It's a trellis, not a graft. You've been staring at it for 30 seconds. I assumed the relationship was delicate. It will hold. The word landed between us with more weight than lumber required. Margot's hands remained around the post. Mine stayed on the crosspiece above her head. We stood close enough for me to see a pale streak of sawdust across her cheek. I wanted to brush it away. I stepped back instead. "I'll get the stain," I said. Her expression shifted, not quite disappointment and not quite relief. "I'll clean the tools." 2 weeks later, Margot received her midterm certification result. I was checking fermentation temperatures when the press house door flew open. "Highest score," she announced. "What?" "In the cohort. Practical and written." Her face was bright with an excitement so unguarded that I forgot every careful rule we had not discussed. I crossed the room, put both arms around her waist, and lifted her from the floor. Margot laughed against my shoulder. Her arms closed around my neck. For a moment I held her as tightly as if joy required anchoring. Then I remembered myself and set her down. Neither of us stepped back. Her hands remained on my shoulders. Mine stayed at her waist. "Congratulations," I managed. "Thank you." The room had gone very quiet. Gid entered from the tank room, took one look at us, and backed through the door he had just opened. Margot's mouth curved. "He is remarkably subtle. He practices." I released her first. That evening, we sat on my porch steps while the last harvest light turned the hillside orange. Margot held a glass of her corrected trial cider between both hands. "Did it take?" I asked. She tasted it. "The blend did." "That wasn't what I meant." Her gaze moved to me. I had opened the question without knowing how to finish it. Margot set down her glass. "Is this something you want?" "Yes." "Or is it something that feels easy because I'm 40 yards away and involved in every part of your work?" "It stopped being easy weeks ago." She waited. "I think about you when you aren't here. I listen for your boots. I save decisions because I want your answer, then resent you when your answer is better than mine." Romantic. "I'm doing badly." "You're doing honestly." I looked toward the orchard. The last person I planned a life with left because this place became too small for her. "I know you're not Elise, but wanting something again has made me aware that I can lose it." Margot did not promise she would never leave. She did not tell me Hollis Ridge was enough or that fear made me foolish. "I don't know where I'll be after the apprenticeship," she admitted. "For once in my life, I'm trying not to let somebody else answer that before I do. I don't need a promise about next year." "What do you need?" The honest answer frightened me. "A choice about tonight." Margot shifted closer on the step. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." She touched my face first, giving me time to close the final distance. Our first kiss was slow and almost cautious. Her mouth met mine, paused, then returned with greater certainty when my hand settled at her waist. There was no storm, no medical fear, no darkness to make the world smaller than it was. The sun had not finished setting. The orchard stretched behind us. Either of us could stand and walk away. Neither did. Margot's fingers slid into my hair. I drew her closer, and the kiss deepened until the breath she took sounded like my name without becoming a word. When we separated, her forehead rested against mine. "Did it take?" she whispered. I smiled before I could stop myself. "Ask me tomorrow." "Coward. Respecter of process." She kissed me again. The next morning, I found one of her boots beside my door and a folded note tucked inside it. Yes, that was the whole message. I carried the boot across the yard and found Margot beneath the rebuilt arbor, tying the grapevines to their new supports. Very detailed assessment. She glanced at the note in my hand. "You told me to ask tomorrow. You didn't ask." I evaluated the available evidence. And Margot came down from the step stool. "It took." I put the boot beside her bare foot. "Are we doing this?" I asked. "Leaving footwear across the property?" "Us." Her teasing faded. "Yes, on purpose. Slowly. And without pretending the apprenticeship doesn't end because that conversation is inconvenient." "Agreed. Also, I keep the cottage. You are currently wearing one boot. Independence is complicated." I kissed her beneath the arbor we had built together. The following weeks were not transformed by romance. Apples still bruised. Pumps still clogged. A restaurant in Portland delayed payment for the third time, and Gid threatened to collect the invoice personally while wearing coveralls stained with pumice. What changed was the shape of the evenings. Margot cooked at my house because my kitchen was larger. I cleaned because she believed soaking pans was a moral failure. She read apprenticeship notes with her legs folded over mine while I completed invoices. When a call from her mother left her silent, we stood forehead to forehead beside the sink until she could decide whether she wanted to speak. I learned her coffee precisely. Strong, milk warmed first, no sugar on ordinary mornings, honey after nights she had slept badly. She learned that I wanted company when repairing equipment but silence when doing payroll. She did not praise me for working too much. She turned off the press house lights at 10 and made me explain why anything remaining could not wait until morning. We saw each other tired, competitive, and wrong. Margot submitted a blend to a guild tasting before I thought it was ready. The judges agreed with me. She came home furious with them, then more furious when I did not pretend they lacked taste. You could be comforting. I can comfort you or lie to you. They are different services. She stared at me for a long time. That is deeply annoying. I learned from an expert. She slept at the cottage that night. The next morning, she brought the judge's notes to the press house and asked me to taste the blend again. I had my own failures. I agreed to a wholesale price without consulting Gid because the account felt too important to risk. He showed me, calmly and with devastating arithmetic, that the order would cost us money after transport. Margot did not defend me. You did to Gid what my father does to everyone, she told me later. You decided being responsible meant deciding alone. I wanted to argue. Instead, I called Gid, admitted the mistake, and renegotiated the order. Love had not made either of us easier. It had made avoidance more difficult. Our first night together came in October, after the harvest festival and before the first hard frost. There was no crisis. We had eaten soup, disputed whether a film needed an ending, and fallen quiet on the sofa with her feet beneath my thigh. Margot touched the scar on my palm. Do you want me to stay? Yes. Because it's late? Because I want to wake up with you here. She held my gaze. Then ask me properly. Will you stay with me tonight? Yes. In the bedroom, we took our time. Every new touch was answered rather than assumed. I kissed the place below her ear that made her hold me more tightly. She traced my shoulder as if learning a landscape she intended to remember. Nothing felt like proof. Nothing felt owed. When we finally crossed the last distance, it was because all the smaller ones had already become safe. Later, Margot slept against my chest while rain began softly on the roof. I lay awake with one hand along her back, frightened by happiness and unwilling to reduce it by naming every way it could end. In the morning, she stole half my pillow and all the blankets. That helped. Margot Sinclair arrived 3 weeks later in a black car that looked expensive even under orchard dust. A wine distributor had seen Margot and me together at the regional cider festival. The information traveled through the industry with the efficiency of gossip disguised as concern. Vivian parked outside the cottage at 10 on a Friday morning. She had Margot's eyes, a silver blonde bob, and the controlled warmth of someone accustomed to making disapproval sound like hospitality. I was repairing the cottage sink when she entered. Margot came behind her carrying a grocery bag. Mother, you didn't mention the plumbing problem. I didn't know I was required to submit maintenance reports to Boston. Vivian looked at me, then at the tools beneath the sink. Owen Castellano. It was not a question. Mrs. Sinclair. Vivian, please. She accepted tea and spent 15 minutes asking about the orchard with the polished interest of an investor inspecting an asset she had no intention of purchasing. How many acres? How many employees? What percentage of revenue came from distribution? Did agricultural insurance cover weather losses? Had I considered selling the brand to a larger producer while retaining operational control? Every question was reasonable. Together, they became an assessment of whether her daughter had mistaken a small life for a meaningful one. Owen's business isn't part of my apprenticeship review, Margot interrupted. Vivian placed her cup carefully on the saucer. Your choices have never existed in isolation. That doesn't make them yours. I'm trying to understand what you are building here. Then ask me about my work. I know your work. We spent 20 years preparing you for it. Margot stood beside my chair rather than moving behind it. You prepared me for the work you selected. Vivian's composure shifted. Beneath the control was fear. Not of me exactly, but of a daughter becoming unrecognizable. You will be 30 next year. The beverage division cannot wait indefinitely while you experiment. This isn't an experiment. Her mother looked around the small cottage. Then what is it? Margot took a breath. Mine. Vivian left 40 minutes later without raising her voice. Charles called that evening. Margot put the phone on speaker because she was tired of family conversations changing shape when repeated. Her father did not ask about me. He spoke about succession planning, board expectations, and the beverage division's next fiscal year. The position has to be assigned by April, he explained. We held it for you because the apprenticeship was supposed to strengthen your preparation. It has. Then return when the program ends. I haven't decided that's what I want. Silence crossed the line. If you decline, the division goes to Julian. Permanently. Your stipend ends now, and your name will be removed from the succession trust documents. We cannot plan a company around uncertainty. The cruelty was not in his volume. It was in how neatly love and business had been placed on the same spreadsheet. Margot's face went pale. I moved closer but did not touch her until she reached for my hand. Does Julian want it? He is willing to take responsibility. Her brother had spent years being prepared for the company's top role. Giving him the beverage division too would secure Charles's succession plan and quietly erase the one professional territory Margot had believed would remain hers. I'll finish the apprenticeship, she replied. After that, I'll decide what work I want without the stipend or the trust deciding for me. Margot, don't make a permanent decision to prove you can. I'm not proving anything. I'm finally making one. She ended the call. For several seconds, she stood completely still. Then she opened her banking app. What are you doing? Checking how long I can cover rent and tuition. You don't have to do that tonight. I do. Let me help. Not yet. The words were calm. I mistook that for strength instead of recognizing the old habit beneath them. The stipend stopped the following week. Margot took extra guild shifts, postponed her place in a certification workshop when the first payment came due, and sold 2 cases of wine her parents had given her after graduation. She told me none of this until each decision was complete. When I learned about the workshop from another apprentice, something cold settled inside me. I watched her lose money, professional security, and the shape of family belonging she had been promised. Her choices were her own. My fear made every cost feel adjacent to me, so I began withdrawing with enough politeness to call it space. I worked later. I answered messages after an hour instead of immediately. I stopped leaving coffee at the cottage because I told myself she needed independence. When she came to the porch, I claimed exhaustion and went inside early. Gid noticed in 4 days. You're leaving before she can, he observed while we cleaned a tank. She hasn't said she's leaving. Exactly. Her life just became materially harder. Then ask what she needs. She needs options. She had options. She chose one you don't trust. I resented him because he was close enough to the truth to make denial difficult. Margot confronted me in the reserve room. I was checking the corrected barrel. The glass-rested portion had softened beautifully when she entered and closed the door. What did I do? Nothing. Do not give me that word unless you mean it. I set down the tasting glass. You've lost your stipend. You gave up a role people spend their whole careers trying to reach. I don't want you more entangled here before you understand what that costs. Here. Meaning the orchard? Here. Meaning me. Her expression sharpened. You think I chose against my family because of you? I think being with me made the alternative look easier. Easier. She gave a disbelieving laugh. I'm working 14-hour days and selling wine so I can still take the workshop. Nothing about this is easy. That is my point. No. Your point is that you don't trust me to understand my own decision. I'm trying to keep you from losing more. You're deciding my future for me and calling it noble. Her voice remained quiet, which made every word clearer. My father tried to control me with money. Don't control me with guilt. I stepped back as if distance could make the comparison less accurate. That isn't what I'm doing. Then tell me what you're actually afraid of. Margot, say it without turning it into something you're doing for me. I looked at the barrels, the floor, anywhere that did not require me to be seen. I'm afraid I'm not enough. The room went still. Once spoken, the rest followed without dignity. Elise left when a better version of her life became available. I built this place into something that didn't require anyone to stay, and then you arrived. Watching you lose things makes me feel as if eventually you'll look at the cost and realize I was another small choice you mistook for freedom. Margot did not rush to contradict me. She let the confession remain ugly and complete. I didn't walk away from my family's money, she finally replied, to become somebody else's excuse for making decisions over my head. I know. Do you? Her eyes filled. Because you have been ending this in pieces without giving me the dignity of hearing the sentence. I don't want to end it. Then stop practicing. Her hand lifted as if she might touch me. It stopped between us and fell back to her side. That restraint hurt more than anger. I need a few days, she said. Not as punishment. I need to work out what is mine before we talk again. I nodded. She left the reserve room without asking me to follow. The next 4 days contained no dramatic suffering. That made them worse. Her cottage lights came on every evening. Her boots disappeared from beside my door. We worked different hours and spoke only about tasks. When we crossed paths near the tanks, neither of us touched. I drafted messages and deleted them. On the second day, Rosalie found me repairing a gate that was not broken. You know, she remarked, maintenance is most useful when applied to the damaged thing. The hinge was loose. The hinge is terrified of abandonment. I stared at her. Gid talks, she explained. That evening, I wrote down every decision I had recently made on Margot's behalf without asking her. The list was longer than the withdrawal. It included smaller things I had once considered kindness. Declining a festival invitation because she was tired, changing her guild hours to protect her study time, telling Gid not to offer her a paid blending shift because I feared it would look like charity. Protection had become a language I used to avoid asking questions whose answers I could not control. Margot spent the same days doing her own arithmetic. I learned later that she showed Rosalie the real state of her finances, called the guild about a payment plan, and admitted to Gid that she needed paid work rather than unofficial favors. She also called Julian not to fight over the division, but to ask whether he had known about the ultimatum. He had not. On the 5th evening, Margot asked me to meet her in the grafting rows. The trees had begun dropping leaves. The successful spring grafts were slender new branches now. Their unions thickened beneath weathered tape. Margot stood with both hands in her coat pockets. I have 2 things to tell you, she began. First, I'm struggling. I can cover the remaining apprenticeship fees, but not the certification workshop and rent without borrowing money. I waited. Rosalie offered a small loan. We wrote a repayment agreement. I'm taking it. Okay. You don't have to like it. I don't know whether I like it, but you told me before solving every part alone. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Second, I love you. I am still angry with you. The truth entered me without making either half disappear. I love you too, and I was wrong. About what? Withdrawing. Telling myself I was giving you an exit. Deciding what you could afford emotionally. All of it. I told her about the list. I don't want credit for understanding it now. I want an agreement for what I do next. Margot took one hand from her pocket. No unilateral decisions about us disguised as protection. Agreed. If you're afraid I'll leave, you tell me you're afraid. You don't punish both of us in advance. Agreed. And I tell you when I'm struggling before I turn the struggle into a completed report. Even if you don't want help, especially then. Information is not permission to take over. Agreed. For a moment neither of us moved. The last time we had stood among those trees, grafting had been a lesson I controlled. Now the question belonged to both of us. Margot looked at the new branches. Did it take? Fear made her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I crossed the space between us. It took, I answered. We damaged it. That isn't the same as losing it. She came into my arms with enough force to move me back one step. I held her tightly, one hand between her shoulder blades and the other at the back of her head. Her face pressed against my neck. We stayed that way until I felt her breathing slow and my own body understood that repair was not the same as escape. Only then did she lift her face. May I kiss you? Please. The kiss was tender and uncertain at first. It did not erase the 4 silent days or guarantee we would never repeat ourselves. It was simply the first choice made under the new agreement. Winter reduced the orchard to structure. Without leaves, every bad cut and strong branch showed. Margot finished the apprenticeship using her wages, the guild payment plan, and Rosalie's loan. She repaid the first installment before Rosalie believed it necessary and accepted paid blending work from Castellano only after Gid drew up a proper contract. Her relationship with her parents remained strained. Vivian sent careful messages. Charles sent none. Julian called often, increasingly bewildered by how much of the company he had inherited without being asked whether he wanted it. Margot earned her certification in March. She did not save my business. Castellano cider was not dying, and love was not a marketing strategy. But her work opened possibilities I had previously rejected because expansion felt too much like inviting loss. Together with Gid, she helped redesign our regional tasting materials and introduced us to 3 independent restaurants that paid on time. I approved a modest distribution increase only after the cash flow forecast survived all 3 of us trying to destroy it. I learned to build beyond what felt safely small. Margot learned that accepting support did not place her life in someone else's ownership. In April, Charles and Vivian requested dinner at a restaurant halfway between Boston and Hollis Ridge. No agenda was included, which Margot correctly identified as an agenda. You don't have to come, she told me. Do you want me there? She considered the question instead of answering for my comfort. Yes. Then I'll come. The dinner was not a reconciliation staged for witnesses. Charles did not restore the trust documents. Margot did not ask him to. Vivian apologized in complete sentences, then weakened one of them by explaining too much. I was afraid you were choosing hardship because it felt more authentic, she admitted. I chose work I wanted, Margot replied. Some of the hardship was yours. Vivian absorbed that without asking to be forgiven immediately. Charles turned to me near dessert. I judged the scale of your operation before I understood it. You understood the scale correctly. He almost smiled. I misunderstood what it required. It was not warmth, but it was honest. Julian confessed that he hated managing beverage procurement and wanted Margot's advice. She offered 1 monthly call as a paid consultant, not a hidden return to the role she had refused. Nobody left healed. Nobody left pretending. It was the first honest meal the Sinclairs had managed in years. 1 year later, the stone cottage was still legally Rosalie's and entirely Margot's in every way that mattered. Her books filled the shelves. Her trial batches occupied the cellar. The repaired grape arbor had survived snow and carried new leaves. Most nights, however, she slept at my house above the orchard. We had folded our lives together gradually. Her coffee grinder stood beside mine. My invoices migrated away from the dining table because she insisted meals deserved neutral territory. Her boots still appeared beside whichever door she had most recently forgotten them at. Vivian visited twice a year and called first. Charles came once, walked the orchard with Gid, and asked questions that sounded less like valuation. Julian visited most often. Away from the company, he turned out to like pruning and silence, although he remained dangerous with shears. Margot ran an independent beverage consultancy from the cottage and produced small cider collaborations under her own name. She worked with Sinclair Hospitality when the contract was fair and declined when it was not. We still failed in familiar ways. I once declined an out-of-state festival before asking whether she wanted to go. She caught me halfway through the cancellation email. Margot once hid a late client payment for 10 days while rearranging her budget. We recognized the old patterns sooner, argued without cruelty, and corrected them before fear became policy. That was what lasting change looked like for us. Not purity, earlier honesty. One cool evening, I walked the grafting rows we had worked on the spring everything began. Margot followed with 2 mugs of coffee. She wore my coat over her sweater and had twisted her hair into the loose knot that always failed by the end of a working day. I cut the final strip of weathered tape from one young tree. The union beneath it was strong. New wood had thickened around old. Every graft in the row had survived its first winter and begun a second year of growth. Margot handed me a mug. Did it take? For years the question had meant trees, cider, jokes, kisses, and fear. It had been our way of asking whether something fragile would hold without demanding certainty too soon. I put down the shears. It took a long time ago. Her expression softened. I touched her waist and drew her close. She rested one hand against my chest. You're retiring the grafting term? For us, that seems wasteful. We worked hard on the metaphor. Plain truth deserves a turn. She waited. I looked at the woman who had entered my press house without permission, corrected my reserve, challenged every system I had mistaken for safety, and stayed without surrendering any part of herself to prove she could. I love you, I told her. I want this life with you, not because you need it, not because I'm afraid you'll leave, because you are free to choose and so am I. Margot placed her coffee on the grass. Plain truth, she agreed. I choose it too. She wrapped both arms around my neck and kissed me among the trees my grandfather had planted and the branches we had added ourselves. Grafting does not erase the cut. The mark remains where 2 living things agreed to grow beside and through each other. The strength comes from neither piece pretending it was always whole in exactly that shape. You bind what needs protection. You give it time. You do not pull it apart every morning to demand proof. Then one day you look closely and realize the waiting ended long before the question did. Margot's boots were beside my door when we walked home. This time we left them there together.